The entire forest was on fire. Smoke blackened the sky. The heat was unbearable, and everything seemed lost. In the middle of this inferno, a wild Mustang fought desperately to survive, trapped between flames, exhaustion, and fear. But then something incredible happened. A man appeared. Would he risk his life for a wild horse? And would the Mustang trust him in time to escape? What happened next will leave you speechless. The air was thick with smoke, the sky darkened by swirling ash. Everything around him crackled and burned. The towering pines, the dry underbrush, the earth itself. Flames twisted through the forest, devouring everything in their path. Blaze ran, his powerful hooves pounding the scorched ground. His sleek chestnut coat glistened with sweat and soot. His muscles burned, but he couldn't stop. The inferno was closing in from every side, trapping him in a nightmare with no escape. The fire had come fast, a sudden explosion of heat and terror. He had been grazing peacefully near a stream when the first blast of smoke filled his lungs. Then came the sound, a deep, terrifying roar, like a monster consuming the land. Instinct took over. He bolted, dodging through trees, pushing through burning branches that scorched his sides. His wild, untamed spirit told him to keep moving, to find an opening, anything that would lead him to safety. But now, there was nowhere left to run. The flames surged ahead, surrounding him on three sides. The heat was unbearable, singeing his mane, burning his nostrils with every breath. His dark eyes darted left and right, frantic, desperate. Trapped. The only direction left was a narrow path leading into a canyon, its rocky walls rising high above him. It was dangerous, but the fire was worse. With a final, desperate breath, Blaze charged forward, his hooves kicking up embers as he disappeared into the canyon's shadows. Miles away, Owen Carter stood on the edge of a burning ridge, his breathing steady but tense behind his oxygen mask. The 46-year-old wildfire fighter had seen countless infernos in his career, but something about this one felt different. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Carter, we're pulling back. The fire's spreading too fast. North Sector is a lost cause." Owen scanned the burning valley below. He knew what that meant. Everything in the path of the fire would be left to burn, including any wildlife still trapped inside. A deep knot formed in his stomach. He had always hated this part. "Copy that," he said, his voice tight. "I'll do one last sweep before heading out." He turned his gaze back toward the flames, something in his gut telling him to stay just a little longer. And then he saw it, a flash of movement in the canyon below. At first, it was just a blur through the smoke, but as the wind shifted, he saw it clearly. A horse, a wild Mustang, running for its life. Owen's heart clenched. The stallion was heading straight toward a dead-end cliff. "No, no, no!" Without thinking, Owen grabbed his radio. "Hold position," he said. "I see something. I'm going in." "Carter, what the hell are you?" Owen turned off the radio. And then he ran. Blaze skidded to a stop, his hooves kicking up dust and ash. His muscles trembled, his lungs burned, but nothing compared to the horror in front of him. A sheer cliff. The canyon had betrayed him. He turned, his chest heaving, but behind him, the fire raged closer, swallowing everything in a wall of glowing embers. He was out of time. His wild eyes darted frantically, looking for a way out, but there was none. His heart pounded, his instincts screaming at him. Then, through the smoke, a new scent reached his nostrils, something strange, unfamiliar. And then a voice. "Easy there, big guy." Blaze's ears snapped forward, his body stilled, nostrils flaring as he searched for the source of the sound. Then, through the haze, he saw him, a man. A figure emerging from the smoke, wearing heavy fire gear, a helmet, a mask. He wasn't running from the fire. He was coming toward it. Blaze stomped his hooves, his instincts screaming danger, but the man didn't stop. Slowly, cautiously, he raised a hand. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice calm. "But we need to get out of here. Now." Blaze's breathing was ragged, his muscles coiled, ready to flee or fight. The man took another slow step closer. The fire roared behind them, the smoke thickening. They were out of time. Blaze had to decide, fight, run, or trust. And in the next second, he made his choice. Blaze's legs shook with exhaustion, his hooves slipping against the loose dirt near the cliff's edge. His body was soaked in sweat, his lungs burning from the heat and smoke. The fire roared behind him, a living, breathing monster, its orange glow reflecting in his wide, frantic eyes. The man took another step forward. Blaze snorted, stomping his front hooves, his ears pinned back. His instincts screamed at him, "Don't trust, don't let him get closer." But the fire was pressing in, its heat licking at his hindquarters, offering no other way out. Owen held up both hands, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Hey, easy now," he said, keeping his tone low and calm. "I know you're scared, but we don't have much time." Blaze's tail whipped behind him, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring, ready to bolt over the edge if he had to. The human smelled of smoke, sweat, and something sharp. Metal, maybe. The stallion's ears twitched slightly. Owen saw it, a sign of hesitation. That was all he needed. He took another step. Blaze's hooves skidded dangerously near the edge. The ground beneath him was loose, unstable. If he moved wrong, he'd fall. Owen knew it too. "All right, listen, big guy," he murmured, glancing at the sheer drop. "I know you don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either." He slowly unclipped a rope from his belt, making sure the Mustang could see his movements. No surprises, no sudden moves. Blaze's nostrils flared. He eyed the rope suspiciously, his body trembling with indecision. Owen took another step, now only a few feet away. The heat behind them intensified. The fire was closing in fast. Sparks rained down from burning branches, the smoke thickening. If they didn't move now, it wouldn't matter if Blaze trusted him or not. They'd both be dead. "Look, I know you can run. I've seen it," Owen continued, his voice didn't shake. "But you can't run through fire. You'll never make it." Blaze stomped his hoof again, his ears flicking back and forth. The fire was screaming at him to run, but the human, he wasn't forcing him. He was waiting, letting Blaze decide. Owen could feel his own heart pounding, sweat dripping down his back. This was insane. He should have turned back long ago, but something about this Mustang, he couldn't walk away. The stallion lowered his head slightly, eyes locked on Owen's hands, a test. Owen slowly reached out, palm up, letting Blaze take the lead. The Mustang hesitated, his breath ragged, his chest heaving. Then, finally, he nudged Owen's hand, just barely. Owen exhaled sharply. That was all the confirmation he needed. "All right, partner," he muttered, moving quickly. "Let's get out of here." He moved to Blaze's side, looping the rope gently but firmly around his thick neck, securing it without tightening. Blaze tensed, muscles rippling, but he didn't fight it. Trust, a fragile, delicate thing, but right now it was the only thing keeping them alive. The ground beneath them trembled as another tree collapsed into the canyon, sending sparks flying. The wall of flames was now less than 30 feet away. No more time. Owen pulled on the rope, clicking his tongue. "Come on, big guy. Move." Blaze hesitated for half a second. Then he leapt forward. Owen ran beside him, pulling the rope just enough to guide him, but not enough to restrain him. The stallion's powerful muscles surged, his hooves kicking up ash as they thundered toward a narrow trail leading back up the canyon. The fire chased them, roaring like an angry beast. Blaze ran faster than he ever had before. Owen's lungs burned, his legs screaming for relief, but he didn't stop. He could hear the fire snapping at their heels, feel the heat clawing at his back. Just a little farther. The trail curved sharply. Blaze's hooves skidded in the loose dirt, but he adjusted mid-stride, pushing forward. The stallion knew he wanted to live. Owen saw the opening ahead, safety, a break in the flames. If they could reach it, the ground suddenly gave way beneath Blaze's front hooves. A hole hidden beneath ash and debris collapsed under his weight. The Mustang screamed, his legs buckling as he tumbled forward. Owen lunged, grabbing for the rope just as Blaze fell, his body twisting, his hind legs kicking wildly. The world spun into chaos. Owen hit the ground hard, his breath knocked from his lungs. The rope pulled tight in his grip, his hands burning from the friction. Blaze was dangling off the side of the trail, his hooves scrambling for traction, his dark eyes wide with terror. He tried to pull himself up, but the ground beneath him was crumbling. Owen's muscles screamed, his boots digging into the dirt. The stallion was too heavy. The rope began to slip through his fingers. Blaze let out a desperate cry, his body sinking lower. Owen gritted his teeth. "Not today, big guy," he growled. "You're not dying on me." With one final surge of strength, he pulled. Blaze kicked with everything he had, and then the stallion's hooves caught the edge. With a mighty lurch, Blaze hauled himself back up. He landed beside Owen, his sides heaving, his body trembling. For a long moment, they just stood there, both alive. Owen let out a breathless, shaky laugh. Blaze snorted, his ear flicking forward. "Yeah," Owen muttered, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That was too damn close." But they weren't safe yet, because behind them, the fire was still coming. Owen's legs shook as he forced himself upright, his breath ragged, lungs still burning from the smoke. His arms screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to let go of the rope. They were alive. Blaze stood beside him, panting heavily, his powerful chest rising and falling. His dark, sweat-soaked coat glistened in the flickering light of the flames, his nostrils flaring with each deep breath. His ears flicked toward Owen, and for the first time, he didn't look afraid. Owen pressed a hand against the Mustang's damp neck. "You good, big guy?" Blaze snorted, stamping his hoof once, as if answering. Owen let out a short, breathless chuckle. Unbelievable. But their moment of relief didn't last long. A sudden crack tore through the air. Owen's eyes snapped toward the ridge above them. A massive burning tree had weakened at its base. It groaned under its own weight, sparks raining down from its blackened branches. And then it started to fall. Owen's instinct screamed at him before his brain could catch up. "Move!" he roared. Blaze launched forward, his hooves digging into the loose dirt, barely clearing the impact zone as the burning tree came crashing down just inches behind them. A shockwave of embers and dust exploded outward, sending Owen stumbling. Blaze whinnied sharply, his ears pinned back as he kicked out in fear. Owen coughed, waving a hand to clear the dust. His heart pounded like a war drum, adrenaline surging through his veins. That was too close. He turned to Blaze, expecting to see the same panic in his eyes, but the Mustang wasn't running. His chest still heaved from exertion, but he wasn't bolting toward the flames in blind terror. He was watching Owen, and then, just like before, he made a choice. He took a slow, hesitant step toward the firefighter. Owen's breath caught in his throat. This horse, this wild, untamed Mustang, was choosing to stay. Owen swallowed the lump in his throat. "All right, partner," he murmured. "Let's get the hell out of here." With the flames closing in behind them, they ran. The trail twisted uphill, a brutal incline covered in loose dirt and fallen branches. Each step was harder than the last, but Blaze powered forward, his muscles straining but never slowing. Owen ran beside him, his legs screaming in protest. His fire gear was heavy, the heat unbearable, but he didn't stop. The smoke was getting thicker, the firestorm growing louder. They needed to find a way out fast. A few yards ahead, Owen spotted a break in the trees. If they could make it there, they might find safety. Blaze suddenly skidded to a stop. Owen nearly ran into him. What the hell? Then he saw it. The ground ahead was gone. A massive landslide had wiped out the path, leaving nothing but a steep drop into the canyon below. Owen's stomach dropped. No way forward. No way back. And the fire was almost on top of them. Blaze paced anxiously, his ears twitching, nostrils flaring. He could smell it too. They were running out of time. Owen's mind raced. Think, damn it. They needed another way out. A faster way. His eyes darted toward the slope beside them. It wasn't a path. It was a near vertical drop. But he turned to Blaze. "Can you do this?" he muttered. The Mustang's dark eyes locked onto his. A split second of understanding. Then Blaze leapt. Owen's breath caught as the stallion launched off the ledge, hooves barely touching the unstable ground as he tore down the slope. No hesitation, no fear. Owen had no choice but to follow. He threw himself down the incline, his boots skidding over the loose dirt. He grabbed onto tree roots, rocks, anything that would slow his descent. Blaze was ahead of him, maneuvering with pure instinct, dodging fallen logs, finding footholds that Owen never could. For the first time, Owen wasn't leading. He was following. The ground leveled out, and Owen hit the bottom hard, barely keeping his footing. His body ached, lungs burning. Blaze was already there, standing tall, ears forward, watching him. Owen let out a shaky breath. They had made it, but they weren't safe yet. The fire was still raging above them, and now they were stuck at the bottom of the valley. Blaze tossed his head, sniffing the air, looking, thinking. Owen narrowed his eyes. He was searching for a way out. Owen took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, big guy," he murmured. "Lead the way." And with that, the wild Mustang took off into the trees. Owen followed, and for the first time, he wasn't rescuing Blaze. Blaze was rescuing him. Blaze moved like a shadow, weaving through the smoldering valley with a speed and precision that no human could match. His powerful muscles flexed beneath his smoke-streaked coat, his hooves kicking up dust and embers as he navigated through the maze of fallen trees, scorched earth, and burning debris. Owen followed as fast as he could, his fire gear feeling like 1,000 pounds strapped to his back. His legs burned with exhaustion. His lungs felt like they were filled with sand, but he didn't stop. He trusted Blaze now. The Mustang was leading them somewhere, and Owen didn't dare question it. The fire raged above, swallowing everything in its path. The valley had become a trap, surrounded by walls of flames and crumbling earth. Owen could barely see past the thick clouds of smoke, but Blaze never hesitated. The stallion sniffed the air, his ears flicking forward. Then he veered left, taking off toward a narrow, winding trail that seemed to lead straight into the heart of the inferno. Owen's heart pounded. "No, no, no," he muttered, pushing harder to keep up. "That's the wrong." Then he saw it. Just beyond the flames, a break in the valley wall, a way out. Blaze had found it. Owen's stomach tightened, but they weren't safe yet. The flames were closing in fast, licking at the trees, swallowing the ground behind them. The narrow path was their only shot at survival, but it was treacherous, steep, rocky, barely wide enough for the Mustang to pass through. If Blaze lost his footing, if Owen tripped, it was over. The stallion snorted, shaking his head. He knew the risk, and he was ready. Owen gritted his teeth. "All right, partner," he rasped. "Let's finish this." Blaze dug his hooves into the dirt and ran. Owen sprinted after him. The path narrowed, forcing Blaze to slow down, carefully placing each step. His hooves sent small rocks tumbling down the steep drop, but he didn't falter. Owen's boots slipped on the loose terrain, his balance wavering. He grabbed onto a low-hanging branch, his heart hammering as the flames roared behind them. Then, a deafening crack. Owen's head snapped up just in time to see a flaming tree collapse above them, its burning branches crashing down toward the narrow pass. They weren't going to make it. Blaze skidded to a stop, his chest heaving, his dark eyes flashing. There was no way forward. Owen's stomach twisted. He had pushed the Mustang to trust him, had fought to keep them alive, but now he had led them into a dead end. Blaze pawed the ground, his ears flicking back toward the fire. He was thinking, calculating. Owen's pulse pounded. "We need another way," he muttered. Blaze turned his head sharply. Then he looked up. Owen followed his gaze. The canyon wall. It was steep, almost impossible, but not completely. Owen's breath caught. Blaze was a wild horse. The wind cut through the valley like a knife, howling across the frozen landscape with an unforgiving sharpness. Snow swirled in violent gusts, stinging against Ethan Walker's exposed skin despite the fur-lined collar of his heavy coat. Montana winters were merciless, but this storm felt different, like it had no intention of letting anything survive. Ethan adjusted the strap of his rifle across his back, his boots crunching over the hardened snow as he pressed forward through the blizzard. He had set out before dawn, hoping to track a deer before the storm worsened, but now he could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. The world was nothing but white, a vast, endless expanse of frozen death. He exhaled, his breath escaping in a thick cloud of mist. The hunt was over. He needed to turn back before the storm buried him alive. But then he saw it, a dark shape in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow against the endless white, blurred by the swirling snow. His instincts tensed. Was it a predator? A fallen tree? But as he moved closer, the shadow twitched. His heartbeat kicked up. It was alive. Ethan squinted through the storm. The shape wasn't moving much. Something was wrong. With steady steps, he trudged closer, his grip tightening on his rifle, not out of fear but preparation. If an animal was injured, it might lash out in desperation. But as he broke through the last curtain of snowfall, his breath caught in his throat. A massive Mustang horse was struggling in the middle of the frozen lake, not on the ice, but in it. The frozen lake had fractured beneath the Mustang's weight, leaving a gaping hole where dark, freezing water churned violently. The horse's powerful body was half submerged, his front hooves scraping desperately against the jagged edges of ice, trying to pull himself free. Ethan could hear the frantic gasps of the animal's breath, see the violent tremors racking his soaked body. Ice clung to his black coat, his mane and tail dripping with frozen water that turned to stiff icicles against his skin. His dark eyes were wide with exhaustion and fear, flaring with each desperate attempt to climb onto the ice, only to slip back into the freezing depths again. He's drowning. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer to the chest. This horse was dying in front of him, and if he didn't act soon, the ice would claim him. But there was a problem. The ice was thin. If he rushed in recklessly, he'd go under too. Ethan glanced around, his survival instincts kicking in. The lake stretched far and wide, its surface cracked in places from the storm's fury. The Mustang must have wandered onto it unknowingly, only for the ice to give way beneath his weight. The smart choice, the safe choice, would be to leave. Let nature take its course. It wasn't his fight, but Ethan's feet didn't move. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to save himself, but his heart had already made the decision. He slung his rifle off his back and muttered under his breath, "Damn it." Then he ran toward the ice. Ethan's boots slid as he sprinted toward the frozen lake, his breath sharp in his chest. The icy wind lashed at his face, cutting through the thick layers of his coat, but he ignored the pain. The only thing that mattered was the horse, fighting, struggling, slipping deeper into the freezing abyss. The Mustang's massive black body trembled violently, his powerful legs kicking at the ice, but the slick surface refused to give him the leverage he needed. He was losing the fight. His movements were slowing, his flared nostrils barely managing to pull in shaky, uneven breaths. The cold was shutting him down. Ethan skidded to his knees, his body landing dangerously close to the fractured ice. The Mustang flinched, his dark eyes rolling with fear, unsure if the man approaching was a rescuer or a threat. "Easy," Ethan muttered, his voice low but firm, carrying through the howling wind. His instincts screamed at him to move carefully. One wrong step, and they'd both go under. Ethan reached out, testing the ice around him. It groaned, threatening to give way. The lake had already taken half the horse. It wouldn't hesitate to take him too. The Mustang kicked again, his hooves smashing against the brittle ice, sending shards flying. Ethan winced. The hole was widening. The more the horse fought, the worse his chances became. Damn it. Ethan needed a rope, something strong enough to pull the horse free. He patted his coat pockets. Nothing useful. He had his rifle, a hunting knife, a few supplies, but no rope. His heart pounded as he scanned the frozen wasteland. He had seconds, maybe a minute at best, before the horse's body locked up completely. Use what you have. Ethan's fingers moved to his waist, yanking his thick leather belt free. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Lying flat against the ice, he stretched the belt out toward the Mustang's muzzle, inching forward as much as he dared. "Come on, big guy," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Take it." The Mustang snorted weakly, his body shaking so hard Ethan could see the tremors running through his soaked muscles. The stallion's legs were barely kicking now, his chest heaving as if he was trying to decide whether to keep fighting or let go. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The belt brushed against the Mustang's frozen lips, but he didn't bite down. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Come on, damn it." Then something shifted. The Mustang's dark eyes flickered, as if somewhere inside his freezing, exhausted mind he understood. With a final burst of instinct, the Mustang lunged forward, his teeth clamping down on the belt. Ethan didn't hesitate. He yanked with everything he had. The Mustang kicked hard, his front hooves catching the ice, clawing at the frozen edge. His body lifted just enough. Then the ice beneath Ethan shattered. A heartbeat later, the freezing abyss swallowed him whole. The shock of the freezing water hit Ethan like a hammer. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. A brutal, unforgiving cold that stole the breath from his lungs and sent a violent jolt through his entire body. His instincts screamed at him to move, to fight, but the ice-cold water paralyzed his muscles in an instant. His vision blurred as he plunged deeper, the weight of his soaked coat dragging him down like an anchor. His boots scraped against nothing but empty water, and for a moment, panic crept in. "Get out! Now!" Ethan forced his arms to move, kicking hard and reaching for the edge of the ice above him. His fingers brushed against the frozen surface, but the thick layer of frost was too slick, too solid to grip. The water was dragging him deeper, stealing the heat from his body second by second. And then he heard it, a desperate, frantic splash beside him. Through the haze of the water, he saw movement. A massive black form thrashing wildly, fighting just as hard as he was. The Mustang. He was still in the water, still fighting. Ethan's survival instincts overpowered his shock. He lunged toward the Mustang, forcing his body through the icy resistance. The stallion's hooves kicked blindly, sending bursts of frozen water crashing into Ethan's face. But Ethan didn't stop. He had made a choice to save this horse, and he wasn't about to let them both die. Gritting his teeth, he lunged forward, one arm wrapping around the Mustang's thick, trembling neck. The stallion snorted, thrashing in panic, but Ethan held on tight, his fingers gripping the horse's soaked mane. "Easy, big guy," he gritted through clenched teeth. "I've got you." But he had no idea how he was going to get them out. The ice creaked above them, the edges of the hole glistening with a deadly, deceptive stillness. The cold bit through Ethan's skin, his hands burning from the sheer intensity of it. The Mustang was shaking violently, his muscles locking up from the cold. Ethan knew he had seconds, maybe a minute, before the stallion's body shut down completely. And if the horse went under, there was no pulling him back. "Not happening," Ethan muttered. His fingers moved instinctively, reaching for the soaked leather belt still wrapped around the Mustang's muzzle. His arms were numb, but he forced his muscles to obey. One shot, one chance. With every last ounce of strength, Ethan threw the end of the belt up onto the ice, looping it over a thick chunk of solid surface just beyond the broken edge. The leather caught, barely, but it was enough. Now he had to pull. Ethan gritted his teeth and yanked hard, digging his boots into the freezing slush beneath him. The Mustang let out a sharp, desperate cry, his legs kicking wildly beneath the water as he tried to follow Ethan's lead. "Come on!" Ethan shouted, his breath ragged. "Move, damn it!" The stallion's hooves scraped against the ice again, this time finding just enough traction to lift his massive body up. Ethan pulled harder, his arms screaming in pain, his frozen fingers barely responding. His vision darkened at the edges, his lungs burning. But then the Mustang's front legs hooked onto the solid ice. A deep, guttural sound tore from the stallion's chest as he kicked with everything he had left. The muscles in his shoulders flexed and strained, and with a final, agonizing push, he lunged forward. The Mustang collapsed onto the ice, his massive body shaking, his breath coming out in sharp, heavy gasps. He was out, but Ethan wasn't. The moment the stallion freed himself, the remaining ice beneath Ethan gave way. He felt himself dropping deeper, the freezing darkness closing in. A brutal, crushing weight pressed down on his chest. The cold was winning. For the first time, he felt his body giving up. The last thing he saw before his head slipped beneath the water was the Mustang standing over him, watching. And then everything went black. The water was pulling him under. Ethan barely felt the impact when his head slipped beneath the icy surface. Only the crushing, paralyzing cold that wrapped around his chest like a vice. His lungs seized. His vision darkened. His body was numb, sinking like dead weight. The world faded into silence. Is this it? Somewhere far above the surface, he thought he heard a sound, a sharp, heavy snort, hooves scraping against the ice. But his body was failing him. His thoughts were slipping away. The cold was winning. Then a sudden, violent jolt. Something grabbed him, or rather, something hooked onto his coat, yanking him upward with brute force. His head broke through the surface, and a sharp, freezing gust of air slammed into his lungs. He coughed violently, his body racked with tremors, but something was keeping him from going under again. He gasped, struggling to focus. And then he saw it, the Mustang. The massive stallion, still panting from his own escape, had planted his powerful hooves on the solid ice and was gripping Ethan's coat collar with his teeth. The horse was pulling him out. Ethan could hardly process it. A wild animal, one that had barely trusted him moments ago, was saving his life. The stallion grunted, straining, his muscles flexing as he backed up slowly, dragging Ethan toward the thicker ice. Ethan's frozen hands clawed at the edge, his arms screaming in protest, but he forced himself to push up, kicking against the freezing slush. The Mustang didn't let go. With one final lurch, Ethan hauled himself onto the ice, collapsing onto the solid ground. His body shook violently, his teeth chattering so hard his jaw ached. He was alive, and the Mustang had saved him. For several long moments, neither of them moved. The storm howled around them, but all Ethan could hear was his own ragged breathing and the deep, heavy exhales of the stallion beside him. Ethan rolled onto his side, forcing his numb fingers to move as he pushed himself up onto his elbows. He turned his head, locking eyes with the Mustang. The stallion stood a few feet away, his massive frame still trembling, his breath clouding the air in thick puffs. His dark coat was soaked, his black mane stiff with frozen water, but his stance was strong. His wild eyes met Ethan's, unblinking. The cowboy's heart slammed against his ribs. They weren't just looking at each other. They were acknowledging each other. Ethan let out a breathless, stunned laugh. "You really are something, aren't you?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. The Mustang snorted, shaking his massive head. For the first time, Ethan saw something in the horse's eyes that hadn't been there before. Trust. A moment later, the stallion took a slow step back. Then another. Ethan's chest tightened. The Mustang was going to leave. Of course he was. That's what wild horses did. But then he stopped. Ethan barely breathed as the stallion paused, his ears flicking back toward him, as if he were waiting. Not running. Not fleeing. Waiting. Ethan swallowed hard, ignoring the ache in his frozen limbs as he forced himself to his feet. His voice was raw when he spoke. "You sticking around or what?" The Mustang didn't move. Didn't run. Didn't leave. Ethan's breath fogged in the air as he took a single step forward. The stallion watched him carefully, his muscles still taut, his instincts still wild. But he didn't back away. Ethan nodded. For now, that was enough. Ethan's legs felt like lead as he took a shaky step forward. The cold had sunk deep into his bones, and every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his stiff, half-frozen muscles. His soaked clothes clung to his skin, offering zero protection against the bitter wind. But none of that mattered because the Mustang was still standing there. Ethan had expected the stallion to bolt the second he could, disappearing into the wilderness like he was meant to. But he hadn't. He was waiting. The storm howled around them, thick snowflakes falling in sheets, coating the frozen landscape in endless white. The Mustang stood strong despite the cold, his powerful legs locked in place, his dark coat still dripping with half-frozen water. Ethan kept his steps slow, careful, watching the Mustang's body language. The stallion's ears twitched, his muscles flexing, but he didn't retreat. Ethan stopped a few feet away, letting his breath fog the air between them. "You don't have to stay," he murmured, voice hoarse from exhaustion. The Mustang snorted, shaking his massive head, sending bits of frozen water flying from his mane. Ethan huffed a laugh, shifting his weight. His body was begging him to sit, to rest, but he knew that if he did, he might not get back up. The cold was still a threat. He glanced toward the tree line in the distance. His cabin was too far. If he didn't move now, he'd never make it back. His gaze flickered back to the Mustang. A crazy idea crept into his mind, but he shoved it away. No, the horse won't let you near him. Still, if there was ever a chance, this was it. Taking a slow breath, Ethan extended his hand, palm facing down, careful not to make any sudden movements. The Mustang's ears twitched, his nostrils flaring slightly. Ethan held his breath, waiting. This was the test. Either the stallion would accept him, or he'd be left alone to freeze to death. Seconds passed. Then the Mustang did something Ethan hadn't expected. He lowered his head just slightly. Ethan swallowed hard, his fingers aching with the cold as he took another step closer. The Mustang didn't move away. He slowly, carefully, let his hand graze the stallion's damp muzzle. The Mustang's skin twitched, but he didn't pull back. Ethan exhaled, something tight in his chest loosening. "You're something else, you know that," he muttered, barely believing what was happening. The stallion huffed, hot breath misting the cold air between them. Ethan knew he didn't have much time. His body was shutting down, the cold becoming unbearable. He had to get moving. Now, for the first time in years, Ethan did something he never thought he would again. He reached for a wild horse. Slowly, he gripped the Mustang's soaked mane, his fingers frozen stiff but holding on. The Mustang tensed but didn't bolt. Ethan braced himself, took a deep breath, and pulled himself onto the stallion's back. The Mustang shifted beneath him, his muscles coiling uncertainly. Ethan held firm, waiting for the inevitable fight. But it never came. Instead, the Mustang snorted, his hooves stamping into the snow, but he remained still. Ethan felt a rush of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He leaned forward, whispering, "Let's go home, big guy." And with that, the Mustang moved. The Mustang's hooves crunched through the deep snow, moving carefully over the frozen ground. Ethan felt every powerful step beneath him, his own body numb and aching. But he knew they had no choice but to keep going. The wind had not eased, and the snow continued to fall in thick waves, blurring the world around them. Ethan could barely see the tree line ahead, but he knew exactly where they needed to go. His cabin. Shelter. If they didn't make it soon, they'd both freeze to death. Ethan tightened his grip on the Mustang's thick mane, his fingers barely responding from the cold. His body rocked with every stride, his frozen muscles screaming in protest, but he held on. The stallion moved forward without hesitation, his body still trembling from the icy lake, but his spirit was strong. Ethan leaned forward, his lips numb as he murmured, "Just a little farther, big guy." The Mustang snorted, his ears flicking at the sound of Ethan's voice, but he didn't slow. The storm was still brutal, the wind cutting through them both, but Ethan focused on the movement, the rhythm of hooves against the frozen earth. One step at a time, one breath at a time, then the Mustang froze. His entire body went rigid, ears snapping forward, muscles coiled with sudden tension. Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is it?" he muttered, forcing himself to sit upright despite the stiffness in his limbs. The Mustang's breathing changed his nostrils.